There is a city in South Florida built around 165 miles of navigable canals, more, locals like to point out, than Venice, earning it the nickname the Venice of America. It was a sleepy fort outpost during the Seminole Wars, became a spring break capital by accident in the 1950s, and is now a city where yacht culture, Caribbean immigration, and old Florida fish camps all somehow share the same 15-mile stretch of coastline. Fort Lauderdale, Broward County. A city that does not have one singular legendary dish the way New Orleans has gumbo or Memphis has ribs. What it has instead is a coastline that has been feeding people from the water for over a century, and a population shaped by Bahamian settlers, Cuban exiles, snowbirds, and sport fishermen who all brought something to the same table. Florida is a state with more oily fish than refrigeration could once handle. And the smoked fish dip is what happens when a coastline solves that problem the same way for 100 years running. Fishermen working the waters off Fort Lauderdale and the rest of South Florida have always pulled in species that don't keep well and don't always sell well fresh. Mullet, amberjack, kingfish, wahoo, Spanish mackerel. These are oily fish, which makes them poor candidates for a quick pan fry but perfect candidates for smoking. The fat content keeps the flesh moist through hours in a smoker instead of drying out. Mullet in particular has a complicated reputation. Outside Florida, it's often dismissed as a bait fish. Inside Florida, smoked mullet on a picnic table with a stack of saltine crackers has been a family gathering staple for generations, going back to a time before anyone called it an appetizer. It was just the snack before supper. The dip itself is what came after the smoking. Smoked fish flaked and blended with mayonnaise or cream cheese, onion, lemon juice, and hot sauce or jalapeno for heat. South Florida lore holds that there used to be small fish smoking huts scattered along the coast that existed for no other purpose than smoking the day's catch and selling the dip. Some still operating in family hands for 50 years and more. Ted Peters. Famous smoked fish, just up the coast in St. Petersburg Beach, has been running continuously since 1951 and is now in its fifth generation of the same family. Conch fritters arrived in South Florida with the Bahamian settlers who were sailing between Nassau and the Florida coast well before Fort Lauderdale was much more than a trading post and a fort. The Bahamian and Caribbean influence on this stretch of coastline runs deep. Key West in particular built much of its early identity on conchs, the nickname for Bahamian transplants who relied on the conch shellfish as a dietary staple. And that influence travels up the coast to Fort Lauderdale's own seafood shacks and tiki bars. A conch fritter is the queen conch, the large pink-lipped sea snail harvested from Caribbean and Bahamian waters, minced and folded into a seasoned batter with bell pepper, onion, and Caribbean spice, then deep-fried into a golden craggy ball that's crisp outside and tender within. It's served with a remoulade, or a Caribbean-style dipping sauce, usually built around mayonnaise, hot sauce, and lime. Conch itself has been harvested out of Florida waters for so long that the U.S. banned commercial harvesting of queen conch in Florida waters back in 1986 to let the population recover, which means virtually every conch fritter served in Fort Lauderdale today is made from conch imported from the Bahamas or Turks and Caicos. Fort Lauderdale's tiki bar and beach bar culture runs on a specific category of rum cocktail, and the Bahama Mama is the one most directly tied to the Bahamian migration that shaped this coastline. The drink, dark and light rum, often with coconut rum added, mixed with pineapple juice, orange juice, and grenadine, served tall over ice with a cherry and pineapple wedge, traces its name and inspiration to the Bahamas, just 50 miles off the Florida coast and connected to Fort Lauderdale by ferry and private boat traffic for generations. The exact bar credited with inventing it is disputed the way most classic tiki cocktails are disputed, but its presence on essentially every Fort Lauderdale beach bar menu, from the historic Elbow Room on the Strip to the tiki huts lining the intracoastal, reflects how thoroughly Bahamian island culture got folded into the city's identity once Fort Lauderdale became a beach destination in its own right. The Bahama Mama is sweet, fruity, strong enough to sneak up on a tourist, and inseparable from the specific Fort Lauderdale image of a boat docked at a waterfront bar on a Friday afternoon. Fort Lauderdale's brunch culture, built around the city's enormous yachting population, snowbird retirees, and a waterfront restaurant scene that runs almost entirely on weekend mornings, produced its own variation on the classic eggs. Benedict, swap the Canadian bacon for a lump crab cake. A Fort Lauderdale crab cake. Benedict starts with a jumbo lump crab cake, mostly crab with minimal filler, pan-seared until golden, set on an English muffin or biscuit, topped with a poached egg and hollandaise, and finished with Old Bay or a Cajun-spiced hollandaise variant that nods to the broader Gulf and South Atlantic seafood tradition this dish borrows from. It's the brunch dish that shows up on the menu of nearly every waterfront restaurant along the Intracoastal and New River, because it solves a specific local problem. How do you make brunch feel like the coast you're sitting on, instead of generic egg and ham brunch food available anywhere in the country? This is the dish that exists because Florida has an invasive species problem, and South Florida chefs decided the best defense was a fork. The lionfish, a venomous, strikingly beautiful reef fish native to the Indo-Pacific, was first spotted off the Florida coast in the 1980s, likely released from home aquariums, and has since exploded across Atlantic reef systems from the Carolinas down through the Caribbean. It has no natural predators in these waters and devastates native reef fish populations by eating everything smaller than itself. Florida's response, embraced enthusiastically by Fort Lauderdale's diving and restaurant community, was to start eating the problem. Spearfishing tournaments, lionfish derbies, and a "if you can't beat them, eat them" campaign that local chefs took seriously. It turns out lionfish meat is excellent, mild, white, flaky, and well-suited to raw preparations. A Fort Lauderdale lionfish ceviche takes the venomous spines off first. The venom is in the spines, not the flesh, and is neutralized entirely once the fish is filleted. Then cures the cubed meat in citrus with onion, cilantro, and chili, exactly like any other ceviche, except the central ingredient is a fish that conservationists are actively asking divers to remove from the reef. Mahi-mahi, the fast-growing, brightly colored game fish that runs through South Florida's offshore waters most of the year, is the backbone of Fort Lauderdale's sport fishing economy. And the mahi taco is what happens when that fishing culture meets the city's large Caribbean and Latin population. A Fort Lauderdale mahi taco is mahi-mahi, either grilled or beer-battered and fried, set in a warm corn or flour tortilla with a cabbage slaw, a citrus crema or chipotle aioli, and pico de gallo. The grilled version leans into the clean, slightly sweet flavor of fresh-caught mahi. The fried version leans into the Baja-style fish taco tradition that travels well in a beach town. Either way, the fish is almost always landed within the day by one of the dozens of charter boats running out of Fort Lauderdale's marinas. This is a city where "catch of the day" on a menu is frequently not a marketing phrase but a literal fact, since the restaurant down the street from the docks may be serving fish that came off a boat that morning. Rum cake's path to Fort Lauderdale runs straight through the Caribbean. The dense, dark, soaked-in rum cake is a staple across the islands, particularly Jamaica and the Bahamas, and Fort Lauderdale's large Caribbean immigrant population, along with its constant tourist traffic to and from the islands, made rum cake a fixture of the local bakery scene well before it became a nationally recognized novelty dessert. A proper Fort Lauderdale rum cake is a moist butter or pound cake base, soaked through with dark rum syrup after baking, sometimes finished with a rum glaze on top, sometimes studded with pecans or dried fruit, depending on which island tradition the baker grew up with. It's the cake sold in gift tins at souvenir shops along the beach, the cake that ends up in a suitcase headed back to wherever the tourist came from, and the cake that, in a Caribbean household in Fort Lauderdale's immigrant neighborhoods, gets made the same way Grandma made it, with the same brand of dark rum, with no substitutions tolerated. The iceberg wedge salad is an old-school American steakhouse classic: crisp iceberg lettuce, blue cheese dressing, bacon, tomato. That Fort Lauderdale's seafood-forward, old-money supper club scene adapted by putting stone crab claw meat on top of it, turning a Midwestern chop house staple into a distinctly South Florida one. South Florida's stone crab season runs October 15th through May 15th, and Fort Lauderdale's waterfront restaurants treat the opening of the season the way other cities treat a holiday. Stone crab claws are harvested with a method unique among crab fisheries. Only one claw is taken from each crab, and the animal is returned to the water alive, where it regenerates the missing claw over roughly a year and a half. It's one of the most sustainable shellfish harvests in American waters, and it means the claws served on top of a wedge salad in Fort Lauderdale are almost always sourced regionally rather than shipped from across the world. Coconut shrimp belongs to the broader Caribbean and South Florida tradition of frying shrimp in a coconut crust, And Fort Lauderdale's beach bar and tiki restaurant scene has served it as close to a house standard as any dish on this list. Large shrimp are butterflied, dredged in flour, dipped in egg, and rolled in shredded coconut before being deep fried until the coconut turns golden and slightly toasted while the shrimp inside stays tender. It's almost always served with a sweet dipping sauce, usually a pina colada-style cream sauce, orange marmalade, or a sweet chili sauce, leaning into the same tropical rum bar flavor profile that runs through the Bahama Mama and the rum cake. It's the dish that shows up on every menu within walking distance of the beach, from the casual tiki shacks to the more upscale waterfront spots, because it captures exactly what a visitor expects a South Florida seafood appetizer to taste like. Sweet, fried, tropical, and built for a drink with an umbrella in it. Key lime pie did not start in Fort Lauderdale, but no list of South Florida food is honest without it, and the argument over where it actually came from has never fully been settled, which feels appropriate for a dessert this tied to the entire stretch of coast that Fort Lauderdale sits in the middle of. The most enduring story credits a Key West cook known as Aunt Sally, working in the late 1800s for William Curry, Florida's first self-made millionaire, who built the pie around what was actually available in an isolated island chain with no refrigeration: canned, sweetened condensed milk, invented by Gail Borden in 1856 specifically to solve the no fresh dairy problem, combined with egg yolks and the juice of small, intensely tart key limes that had been growing wild and semi-cultivated in the Keys since Spanish colonization. A competing theory, advanced by food historian Stella Parks, argues the recipe actually originated in a Borden Company test kitchen in New York in 1931 as a magic lemon cream pie promotional recipe that Florida cooks later swapped lemon for lime. Neither side has fully won the argument, though the earliest documented Key West recipe, found in a 1931 cookbook by local resident Mrs. H. Greiner, predates wide circulation of the Borden version. What's not disputed? A 1926 hurricane wiped out most of the commercial key lime groves in the Keys, and growers replanted with the easier-to-transport Persian lime, which means most key limes used in pies today, including the ones served along Fort Lauderdale's beachfront, are grown commercially around Miami, rather than in the Keys themselves. In 1965, a Florida state representative actually introduced a bill that would have fined anyone $100 for advertising a key lime pie not made with real key lime juice. The bill failed,